January 49 BC, Julius Caesar stood beside a river that most Romans had never heard of. It was not the largest river he had crossed, not the deepest, not the most dangerous. A horse could wade through parts of it without difficulty. Yet by sunrise, it would become one of the most important rivers in human history. Its name was the Rubicon. The winter air was bitterly cold. Frost clung to patches of grass along the riverbank. The sky was dark and heavy, hiding the stars behind a blanket of cloud. Somewhere in the distance, water moved quietly over stones. The river itself looked insignificant. That was the strange thing. Nothing about it suggested that empires, armies, and generations of Romans would remember it for centuries. Because the water was never the point. The decision was, behind Caesar stretched an army of hardened veterans. Ahead lay Rome. Between them stood a law that had protected the Republic for generations. No governor could bring an army into Italy. No general could march on Rome. No citizen, no matter how successful, was supposed to become greater than the Republic itself. For centuries, Romans believed that rule would protect them from tyranny. Tonight, everything depended on whether Julius Caesar still believed it too. For now, he could still turn back. That was what made the night unbearable. The order had not been given. The river had not been crossed. History had not yet chosen its direction. For a few more hours, Rome remained the Rome it had always been, and Caesar remained a man with a choice. Most people imagine Julius Caesar as a man who never hesitated, a conqueror, a genius, a commander who always knew exactly what to do. But history often remembers confidence and forgets uncertainty. 10 years earlier, Caesar had left Rome to govern Gaul. What followed changed everything. Campaign after campaign, he expanded Roman territory farther than anyone expected. He defeated tribes that outnumbered him, crossed rivers that seemed impossible to cross, won battles that should have ended in disaster. Each victory made him richer. Each victory made him more famous. And each victory made Rome more afraid. The Senate celebrated his successes when they strengthened the Republic. They feared them when they strengthened Caesar. By 49 BC, he was no longer merely a successful general. He was the most powerful man in the Roman world outside Italy itself. His soldiers adored him. His supporters praised him. His enemies watched him carefully because they understood something dangerous. The same army that conquered Gaul could march on Rome. And if Caesar ever decided to challenge the Republic, few men possessed the power to stop him. That was why the Senate had sent its demand. Dismiss the army, return to Rome, obey the law. Simple words, potentially fatal consequences. Because Caesar suspected that if he surrendered his command, he would lose far more than power. He might lose everything. Behind him, nearly 5,000 veteran legionaries occupied the winter camp. From a distance, the camp seemed asleep. Up close, it felt alive. The smell of wood smoke drifted through the darkness. Horses shifted restlessly inside their enclosures. Leather straps creaked. A sentry paced slowly between rows of tents. Somewhere, a man coughed. Elsewhere, another fed a final piece of wood into a dying fire. Most of these soldiers had followed Caesar for years. Many had crossed half of Europe beside him. They had marched through forests so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground. They had endured freezing rivers, endless rain, and brutal battles. Some carried scars from campaigns fought hundreds of miles away. Others carried memories they never spoke about. One veteran slept with his helmet beside him. Another lay awake staring into the darkness. A third dreamed of finally returning home. None of them knew exactly what tomorrow would bring, None of them knew that historians would one day remember this night. What they did know was that something felt different. The camp was quieter than usual. The officers moved with unusual urgency. Messengers came and went throughout the evening. Questions traveled faster than answers. Would they march tomorrow? Would they remain where they were? Would there be war? No one knew. And at the center of every uncertainty stood a single man, Julius Caesar. Inside his tent, the problem seemed larger than any battlefield he had ever faced. Maps covered a wooden table. Oil lamps flickered against canvas walls. Letters lay scattered before him. Some came from allies, others from political enemies. All pointed toward the same reality. Rome wanted an answer. The Senate's demand was simple. Dismiss the army. Return as a private citizen. Trust the Republic. To many Romans, this seemed reasonable. To Caesar, it felt like a trap. He knew how politics worked. He knew how quickly fortunes changed. Power protected power. Without office, influence, or soldiers, even famous men could become vulnerable. His enemies had waited years for an opportunity. Now they finally had one. If he obeyed, they could destroy him politically, perhaps financially, possibly even physically. The Republic expected trust. Trust was exactly what Caesar no longer possessed. And perhaps the most frustrating part was that both sides believed they were defending Rome. The Senate feared Caesar's ambition. Caesar feared the Senate's intentions. Neither trusted the other. Both believed the future of the Republic depended on their actions. History would later choose a side. But on this night, certainty did not exist, only doubt. As midnight approached, the true problem became impossible to ignore. Caesar was not choosing between victory and defeat. He was choosing between two different disasters. If he obeyed Rome, he might lose everything he had spent a decade building. His career, his influence, his protection, his future. But if he crossed the Rubicon, he would become something no Roman wanted to be. A man marching against his own country. The choice seemed simple from a distance. It felt impossible from up close, because every path led toward danger. Every solution carried consequences. For years, Caesar had solved problems through action. Attack, advance, negotiate, adapt. There was always a next move. Tonight felt different. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he faced a question that military genius could not answer. Which future is worse? The one where he obeyed, or the one where he resisted? Outside, thousands of soldiers slept, believing their commander had answers. Inside the tent sat a man confronting the possibility that he did not. The river still waited in the darkness. The army still waited beyond the fires. Rome still waited beyond the horizon. And for a little while longer, Julius Caesar could still turn back. The deeper the night became, the clearer the trap appeared. For years, Caesar had believed that every problem contained a solution. A battle could be won. A rebellion could be crushed. A rival could be outmaneuvered. A negotiation could be salvaged. There was always another move, another plan, another opportunity. Tonight felt different, because every possible future seemed broken. If he obeyed the Senate, he would place his fate in the hands of men who had spent years trying to weaken him. If he crossed the Rubicon, he would place Rome itself at risk. Neither choice promised safety. Neither choice promised peace. The more he examined the problem, the smaller the space between the two disasters seemed to become. Outside, the camp slept. Inside, The night refused to end. The oil lamps burned lower. The shadows grew longer. Wax dripped slowly onto the table beside unopened letters. Hours passed. Nothing improved. The same question remained. Which future is worse? The one where he surrendered everything, or the one where he risked everything? History often makes decisions appear inevitable. They rarely feel that way while they are happening. At this moment, the future still existed in two different forms, and Caesar was trapped between them. If you're enjoying this journey into one of history's most consequential nights, subscribe and join us for more stories that place you inside the moments that changed the world forever. By midnight, much of the camp had fallen silent. The laughter had disappeared. The conversations had faded. Even the horses seemed quieter. Only the occasional crack of burning wood interrupted the darkness. The winter cold settled over everything. Canvas tents, armor, weapons, sleeping men. A thin layer of frost began forming along the edges of the camp. Most soldiers slept unaware of the weight hanging over the night. One veteran dreamed of home. Another dreamed of Gaul. A third slept with his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Tomorrow they might march. Tomorrow they might fight. Tomorrow they might become enemies of fellow Romans. But for now, they slept. Caesar did not. Inside the tent, maps remained spread across the table. The Republic existed on parchment. Roads, cities, rivers, names, borders. All of it looked simple under lamplight. Reality was not. The future of Rome no longer depended on armies alone. It depended on a decision one man still had not made. And somewhere beyond the darkness flowed a river, waiting for an answer. Most Romans believed Caesar feared defeat. They were wrong. Defeat was familiar. Every commander understands defeat. Every soldier understands risk. Every campaign contains uncertainty. Those things were part of life. What Caesar feared was something far more difficult. The possibility that there was no correct answer. For 10 years, he had always known the next step. When tribes resisted, he advanced. When enemies attacked, he adapted. When obstacles appeared, he overcame them. There was always a move. Tonight there wasn't. For the first time in years, he stood before a problem that offered no victory. Only consequences he could obey. Consequences he could resist. Consequences he could negotiate. Consequences. Every path led into uncertainty. And uncertainty is often more frightening than danger itself. Because danger has shape. You can see it, fight it, measure it. Uncertainty is different. It exists entirely in the imagination, inside the darkness of possibilities. What if Rome destroyed him? What if civil war destroyed Rome? What if future generations blamed him for everything that followed? What if they remembered him not as a hero, but as the man who broke the Republic? Outside, thousands of men believed their commander possessed answers. Inside the tent sat a man confronting a truth he had never faced before. He didn't know. The river had not been crossed. The order had not been given. He could still turn back, and somehow, that possibility made the decision even harder. Sometime between midnight and dawn, Caesar rose. Not as a man who had finally decided, as a man who could no longer outrun the decision. He stepped out of the tent alone. The cold cut across his face like iron. The clouds still hid the stars, as if the sky itself refused to bear witness to what was coming. He walked to the edge of the river and stopped. Before him, the dark water moved without urgency, indifferent to the weight it carried. The Rubicon didn't know it was a border, didn't know it was a verdict. To nature, it was just water running over stone, as it had for 1,000 years, as it would for 1,000 more. But to Rome, that water was the last line between the Republic and chaos. Legend says Caesar stood there, motionless, longer than any battle had ever demanded of him. There was no enemy in sight, no army to face, just him, the river, and the impossible weight of a choice that would change everything. And then he spoke. Not a shout, not a command, almost a whisper, pulled from the throat of a man who had finally stopped fighting himself. Alea iacta est. The die is cast. There was no more room for doubt, no more room to turn back. He raised his hand, and the darkness began to move. The legions woke in absolute silence. No battle cries, no celebration. Just the metallic sound of armor being adjusted, swords being fastened to belts, thousands of men rising from the frozen ground like a shadow that had finally decided to take shape. They advanced, step after step, boot after boot, until the icy water of the Rubicon closed around the first men, and with them, soaked history itself. Rome would never be the same again. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, it was already too late. Caesar's army had crossed completely. Italy, sacred, untouchable, protected for centuries by the oldest law of the Republic, now trembled beneath the weight of Roman boots, marching against Rome itself. The news exploded like wildfire. Messengers rode day and night, but fear traveled faster than any horse. In Rome, panic swallowed the Senate. Men who had demanded Caesar's surrender just days earlier now fled the city, abandoning everything they couldn't carry in their arms. Pompey, once an ally, now a declared enemy, fled to gather an army capable of stopping what had been unleashed. The civil war had begun, not with a grand battle, not with an enemy army at the gates, but with a single man, alone, beside an insignificant river, deciding that the risk of acting was smaller than the risk of waiting. The years that followed would be filled with blood, battles, and betrayal. But all of it, every single piece of it, began on that freezing dawn, with one man staring into the darkness and choosing the path with no return. Caesar would win the war. He would become the most powerful man Rome had ever seen. But fate has a cruel sense of irony. He crossed a river to protect his future, and in doing so, paved the road to his own downfall. Years later, he would be assassinated by men who feared exactly what he had become that night. The Rubicon, to this day, remains just a small stream in Italy, nearly forgotten by geography. But its name never disappeared, because some decisions don't just change the fate of one man. They rewrite the fate of the entire world. And maybe that's why, over 2,000 years later, we still feel the cold of that night. We still hear the sound of water being cut by Roman boots. We still ask ourselves, what would we do? Standing at the edge of our own Rubicon. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us keep bringing you fascinating stories like this one. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming videos. Also, we'd love to know which country and city you're watching from. Let us know in the comments below.